Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And today we are at episode 52, and we're
Uh-huh.
calling this one, What About Morality?
Yeah.
So,
Or I would even shorten that. What about morale? But okay, we the root word is the same for both of those words, so that's great, perfect.
well, and what was interesting is last time, our last episode, we talked about things not to talk about at work,
Mm,
right? Politics, religion, and bodies.
mm,
And I posted a clip from that show onto LinkedIn and had a pretty lively exchange in the comment threads. And one of the commenters brought up the point, what about morality? Can we
mhm,
talk about morality at work?
mm, mhm.
And my response was that one person's morality may be another person's religion or politics.
Right.
So the example being if someone believes that it is morally wrong to be in a same sex relationship,
Mhm,
their refusal to bake a cake for two women who are getting married to one another might be considered by the person complaining about baking the cake that that is a moral stand, but
mhm.
it will be perceived by me as being something that verges into politics and religion.
Yep.
So, but I thought about it and it's been just kind of sticking in the back of my mind. So I wanted to talk about morality at work.
Mm.
And where do you personally draw the line? And how are we seeing that kind of played out? So, one of the things we are clear about is that this is a podcast about bad bosses
Mhm,
and it's not a political podcast. But
mhm,
given that we have a president and his hench people who
mhm,
are demonstrating such egregiously terrible leadership behavior,
mhm.
sometimes those things overlap. And so
Well,
the
okay, you do realize, of course, there are many out there, people who I just came from spending time with, who would quote the Big Lebowski and say, "That's like your opinion, man." Yeah, no, I just got out of a room full of men, all ex-military, who are pretty happy about the way things are going, which is strange given their chain of command and how the military works, but they seem to be pleased. So,
and that's a good point, right? I mean, again, I have that opinion. Other people have other opinions. But I think what's interesting to me is the idea of what are examples of people who are not just having an opinion, but they're taking action to demonstrate where their moral line in the sand is. So, for example, Michelle King was the acting head of Social Security
mhm,
and she resigned rather than give Musk's Doge hench people access to sensitive Social Security records. And just, as a note on this, and this is from reporting in the New York Times, those records are not just our Social Security numbers.
mhm,
Anyone who applies for disability from the Social Security Administration has to submit very sensitive health records
yeah,
about their disability. And those would all have been open and available to Musk's people. And
mhm,
there's not a lot of information about how any of this information is being protected or used securely, or if even this is within federal law or constitutional rights. And
right.
she quit,
Yep,
she resigned
yep.
rather than give permission and participate in this. What do you think of that?
I was in a position to not as loaded and as charged to make the company was trying to position itself for sale and they needed to mitigate a certain financials, which means fraudulently kind of construct them, and they asked me to aid in their effort, and I said by doing what, and they said by laying off somebody. You have to lay off somebody. And I said, well, I'm not going to lay off the woman who works for me, whose mother just died. I'm not going to lay off the guy who dropped out of his PhD program to come work for us and move 2,000 miles. I'm not going to lay off the 62-year-old gay guy who just bought a house. My staff is small. How much are we trying to mitigate? And they said, well, $8 million. And I go, my staff is a drop in the bucket. We're not going to. I can't do this. And Monday they had a meeting with me, and guess who they laid off? They laid me off, which I was fine with because I could live with myself.
Right.
One of the other guys who was in my position for another publication was given the same offer, laid off his best friend whose wife had just had a child, depriving them of health insurance. And then within a certain period of time, he himself was laid off. So collaborator versus resistor, the end product was the same, but at least I can live with myself. So I defend her decision and I feel perfectly comfortable with it. And I'm sure she does, outside of the fact that I kind of feel like she left us to the wolves.
Well,
But, I mean, she did what she had to do. So in this instance, I think it was to be a moral person and make a moral judgment. So,
well, you bring up a good point, which is one that I think there's a lot to unpack here, right? So
mhm,
it is a privilege to have the financial security and wherewithal to quit your job abruptly without another job to go to. So
yep.
it's a privilege that a lot of us do not have, or I certainly didn't have for much of my professional career. I
Mhm,
think there's also, I mean, I have a number of friends who work in or with the federal government.
mhm.
And some of them made a decision, particularly during the first Trump administration, to stay to thwart illegal or undemocratic behavior.
And
Right.
this is a deep state that he spoke of that he has been trying to systematically get
Right.
rid of. Yes,
Right.
yeah.
And to be clear, these people were thwarting the system by upholding the Constitution of the United States of
Thank
America.
you. Thank you.
Right? They were not throwing wrenches into
Right.
machines. They were saying, this is actually the law. This
Yeah.
is, how this democracy works. And
That
I think,
pesky law.
yeah, that pesky constitution. And I do think that there is a bravery in staying,
Mhm.
in saying, I am going to be the bulwark against the
Yep.
wolves. I am going to stand up. And but it also takes a toll, right?
Mhm.
And so recognizing that, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I think what's interesting to me is, well, I think there's two things, which is one, how do you individually determine and stand up for what that moral line in the sand is? The second
Mhm.
thing is, what is it that's operating here? Right? So
Right.
what is it that's actually happening? And
Mhm.
just to as a little note, we are, because of scheduling conflicts, recording this a week before it airs. So who
Mhm.
knows what can happen in a week, right? There may
Mhm.
have been some great eruption of crazy that we are not discussing. It's because we don't know that that's
I don't think that
yeah.
the word is could be. I think there will be, but anyway, yes.
But I think one of the things that's interesting to me about what's happening right now
Mhm.
is, what is the reason for it? Right.
Mhm.
And I'd love to get your opinion on this, because there's a clip that's been going around on social media by Tim Gerner of the Gerner Group, who talks about the fact that COVID scared our corporate overload lords
Yeah.
because it clearly demonstrated that workers had power.
Yeah. Yeah.
People refused to return to the office. Remember,
Yeah.
there was like the great resignation, quiet quitting. And
Yeah.
there was a great sense of unease as
Mhm.
people claimed their power as
Mhm.
workers,
Mhm.
fueling this corporate late stage capitalism game.
Mhm.
And his point is that that was frightening, and that a lot of what we've seen since the pandemic is the those corporate overlords trying to reassert their control,
100%.
right? And we've certainly seen this in the return to office mandates.
Yep.
Many people are being told to return to an office that no longer exists, or that
Mhm.
doesn't have a place for them to sit or plug into their
Mhm.
computer, and they
Mhm.
sit at the office that they have commuted to and paid for traffic, and paid for parking, and
Mhm.
paid for childcare, to sit on Zoom with
Yeah.
people who are in other offices, right?
Yeah, it's I mean, when during it, I was recording something for NPR via the company I worked for, which is called Ozzy Media at the time, and they said, "We have, medically sealed, we have, COVID free, we've taken care of the studio and the office so that you will not, it's impossible for you to get sick. We need you to come in." And I said at the time, "I've got a 4-month-old daughter at home. Your guarantee is not 100%, and I will not do it. And the move is yours." So what they actually did was they sent somebody by my house with masked up with gloves, and we recorded the segment for NPR in my car in the driveway. And I thought, this is wonderful. And I guarantee you, the people I worked for thought, this is terrible. So yeah, it was massive in the valley, in the Silicon Valley.
But if you think about it, return to office is just one way of asserting dominance. One
Yeah,
of the things that I know is always so inexplicable to people who don't live in the United States is the
yeah.
fact that our in healthcare is directly tied for most of us to our employment,
Yeah.
right? You and I, being self-employed, both understand how expensive it is to buy healthcare in the open market.
You know, this is for me, this is me like a slowly I turned conversation. I'm sorry. I have just paid, can I digress here for a second? $5,500 for medical care in March. Never used it. And all I did was to get my teeth cleaned. And that was it's $1,266 yesterday I had to pay for a teeth cleaning because of just my $3,300 a month healthcare doesn't include dental. Who knew? So there
Right.
you go. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the impact of that is that healthcare is another way in which the corporate overlords can keep control over us. A lot of people can't leave their job because they have a sick child or they have, ongoing medical needs. It's pretty significant, right?
Yeah.
And add to that the fact that these insurance companies are for-profit entities, which make more money if they deny covered benefits or needed medications. So that's one way in which they have power. And what's interesting, wait, what were you going to say?
I want you to enjoy the fact that as of June, I will no longer be paying $3,300 a month for healthcare, and I'm going to Spain, and I feel I'm going to get the platinum Spanish healthcare, not just the one that everybody gets. How much do you think that's costing me? You know Spain, so you know, well, you might have a sense, but you want to take a
I
guess?
mean, for you and your family.
A family of three,
Okay, I'm guessing, I don't know, 1,500 euros.
$200.
Well,
Okay, there you go.
and you know what?
Just-
My understanding is that now that I'm a citizen of Italy,
yes.
I get a card and I pay nothing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go to the nothing thing, but the 200 is just as a buffer, just in
Right.
case, but yeah,
Right. And
ultimately,
so,
yeah, yeah.
but let's look at what that means in terms
Yes.
of work and in terms of the power that these bad bosses can have over us. Right.
Right.
So I don't think it's an accident that federal programs like Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security are now being, systematically dismantled in
Mhm.
the guise of cutting costs or eliminating fraud, because people who are not able to participate in this corporate world in which we live are often people who are sick, disabled, children, the elderly. They don't have the
Mhm.
physical capacity to work in this environment. And up to this point, Medicaid has done a pretty good job of
Mhm.
taking care of those people. I mean, I have talked about the fact that when my son was disabled at 16, I had a lot of trouble getting him the medical care he needed from our insurer, United
Yeah,
Healthcare. The
yeah,
insurance that I got as a vice president of an advertising agency that was part of a global conglomerate of advertising agencies. And I was relieved when my son turned 18 because he could go onto Medicaid. And the coverage on Medicaid for him as a disabled now adult was
mhm,
so much better than
yeah,
the coverage I could get from United Healthcare, having to fight with them over every single thing that
yeah,
happened. So
yeah,
if there is not that safety net, right? If I had not had the opportunity to say, okay, I can put my son on Medicaid, I would have had to take on a second job, work,
yeah,
and so the idea is it's another way
yeah,
of trapping workers. And then the third thing is with Social Security, I mean, very few people are fortunate enough to have pensions anymore. So there isn't a guaranteed income, but a
yeah,
lot of people have a 401k through their workplace,
mhm,
right?
Yep.
And so if Social Security goes away, you are that much more dependent for your retirement
Yep.
onto whatever it is that you're planning to do for retirement. And just one note, I mean, a lot of people talk about Social Security and they seem to forget something. So I
Mm.
have been contributing to Social Security since I got my first job when I was 13 years old.
Mhm.
Right. I've put a lot of money into Social Security. And I, as a person who has worked for herself for 10 years,
Mhm.
I put there's so most of you know this, but there is a employer portion of Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, and there's a personal piece.
Yeah.
So when you get your paycheck, you see what you are contributing to those
Mhm.
federal benefits. And you don't always see what your employer is contributing. But when you are self employed,
Mhm.
you do both of those, right? So
Right.
I'm paying for both of those. And there is a strong possibility. And I am not a rich person. I
Mhm.
mean, Social Security is a key part of my hope for retiring in a comfortable manner. And it's
Yeah.
entirely possible that that will not be available to me. And so all of that money that I have been contributing will go to cutting taxes for billionaires, which I
Yeah.
think most of us would agree is not necessarily a national priority. And what it also does is it means, I will be working probably into my 70s or
Yeah.
I'll move to Italy, right? I mean, and I think that notion, all of these programs, all of these cuts, all of these things that are happening are shifting the balance of power
Mhm.
away from us as workers or managers or contributors in some way to the people who are profiting off of our work. Now, we are digressing because we're talking about morality in this show, but I think it's important because I think in order to understand the moral framework, we need to see and name what is actually happening,
Right.
right? So your friends who are, or your colleagues or people that you're hanging out with who think that Trump is doing a great job, right?
Mhm.
Who believe that it is my opinion that
Yeah.
these proposed cuts that I'm pretty sure are going to happen are immoral. My
Mhm.
guess is that if a child came running down the street, a little kid, 4 or 5, came running down the street bleeding,
Mhm.
they would pick that kid up and they would try to offer that child some aid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
These cuts are going to take food away from children and
Mhm.
access to medical care, which means we're going to have more kids dying of treatable diseases, ear
Yeah.
infections, measles, right? That's going to be what happens. So the administration that they support and the policies that this administration is putting into place are
Yeah.
going to kill vulnerable children,
Yeah.
take away their access to healthcare, and take food off their plate. I am imagining these men that you're talking about would not actually take candy from a child, but they're going to take breakfast from a kid.
They don't believe that. I mean, but you can't. It's through the looking glass. You can't. They believe that's propaganda put out by a leftist media that you can't believe. They don't believe in climate change. They believe that is these are cudgels, oppositional cudgels used by Democratic leftists who have their own agenda that also involves stealing larger amounts of cash. So you can't I mean, this is the kind of thing where what is that thing? What is that? I'm from Missouri, the show me state, where the only way that they will actually be convinced is when they're sitting in rubble, surrounded by crying children, and even then, many of them will say, "Well, this is probably Hunter Biden's fault." I
Right.
mean, I watched the speech last night, so this will come out next week. But I watched a portion of the speech last night, and the number of times that Biden was mentioned was shockingly high to me.
Right.
It's understandable. January, he was still president. The speech came in March. Okay, I'll give you that. But I guarantee you, we get versions of that speech for the next 2 years until the congressional elections. So,
Well,
um,
and to bring it back, like, so again,
right?
this,
We're not politicians here.
right. But what it comes to me is that regardless of what the issue is,
Mhm.
I think most of us are going to need to pick a side at some point in our professional
Yep.
life. Right.
Yep.
So, one of the things that I did, I worked in advertising for a long time. And one of the lines that I drew in the sand was I'm not going to work on pharma, right?
Mhm.
Pharmaceutical advertising to me
Mhm.
is a pernicious cancer.
Mhm.
And people are trying to, the amount of money spent by pharmaceutical industry on marketing drugs to people
Yeah.
is I believe it is a moral wrong. So I
Yep.
made a decision. I'm not going to work on pharma. Other people
Mhm.
make decisions that they're not going to work on, you know, guns or cigarettes or vapes or
Mhm.
cannabis or alcohol or whatever. But they make a decision and they say these are not industries that I want to promote. Right?
Mhm.
Have you ever had something where you
Yeah,
what?
that's why I was smiling because I'm remembering the movie that everyone should see with Klaus Maria Brandauer called Mephisto. Because of course, my first serious job in my field out of college was as an editor at Microwave Systems News, which was microwave systems were landing systems for a plane. Well, they weren't doing nearly as well as a sister publication that I used to make fun of called Defense Electronics. One day I come to work, they say, "Good news." I go, "What's that?" "We're giving you a promotion." "What's that?" "You are now associate editor." I go, "Wonderful." "Of Defense Electronics." I go, I don't want to work for Defense Electronics. I used to make call those guys baby killers. I was, and they were like, they all got quiet. They were, like, these are again all military guys. They all got quiet, and they said, "Well, think it over," which I understood immediately what it meant. You can take the promotion or you, you can get another job. And as I was debating this, the hippie managing editor for Defense Electronics came by my desk, saw me, said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And he sat down. He goes, "Can you agree that every country has a right to defend itself?" I go, "Yes, I can agree that." He goes, "We are information brokers and we're giving information that allows countries, this country specifically, to make an informed decision about how it's going to defend itself. That's what you're doing." And I was like, "I got you." And I took the job. Whether that was true or not, I have no idea. And I comfortably fit in and did the job ably for 3 years. So,
But what is important to me is that you recognize there was a moral dimension to your employment decisions. And that's really what I'm inviting people to do. And I have to pardon the promotion, but in my book, The Saint and the Drunk, I talk about a discernment
never,
process.
never part of the promotion. This is perfectly acceptable. So,
Well, because I talk about this, right? I
yeah.
talk about it's about making decisions about what kind of work or career, making big life decisions.
Mm,
And one of the things that I talk about is that there are times where you have to make a choice. And
mm,
the saint in the title is Saint Ignatius of Loyola, a medieval saint who came up with this spiritual exercise to discern. And he was in the Middle Ages. He had been a mercenary before he
mm,
became a priest. And he talked about, he has an exercise called the two standards, standards meaning flags.
mm,
And he said there is a battle. Imagine a battlefield, and under one side of the battlefield is fighting for good. One side of the battlefield is fighting for evil. They
mm,
each have their flags.
mm,
Which one are you fighting for?
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And he says you need to make a choice. You need to understand which one. And I understand that for a lot of people, that kind of binary, good and evil. Of course, he's a medieval saint, so he uses Jesus and the devil. That can seem antiquated and not relevant. But I think there's a lot of times where we are asked to choose which side. And the
Okay.
challenge is when we don't realize that we are picking a side.
Right.
So to use another like theological example, C.S. Lewis says that we are on an eternal trajectory.
Mm,
And if you imagine a line from me all the way out to eternity, a
mhm,
small deviation away from the good towards the bad,
mhm.
extended into eternity, is going to be a very significant deviation
Of
between good
course.
and bad.
Of
And
course.
that those small decisions accrete over time.
Yep.
And that's what I think is interesting is to recognize that first decision can be followed by a second decision and another and another and another until you take someone who was a went to law school to try to help people um, protect their rights might
Mhm.
find themselves at the midpoint of their trajectory defending the Sacklers from having to have any financial responsibility for starting the opioid crisis through their
Yeah.
marketing of OxyContin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's like there are a lot of people who start out in one place going to
Yeah.
law school to help people and find themselves supporting the people who put Oxy into the world. And
Yeah.
they have reasons for it. Right. And I'm not suggesting that I haven't made choices that were not skillful and
Mhm.
justified it because of I need the money, I'm supporting two kids, blah, 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 blah. But I
Mhm.
think what's important is to name what our decisions are, to
Mhm.
recognize that there's a moral component and think it through, right? Like, what are our grandchildren going to look back at this period of time and
Mhm.
think?
Mhm.
Right? We've seen lots of people talk about the tropes of the descendants of Nazis
Yeah.
looking back in horror and realizing their grandparents were Nazis or participated in some way with that regime. It,
Mhm.
I want my grandchildren to look back and be, Nana was a badass,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
right? And I don't think that we have enough conversations individually with
Mhm.
one another or even just with ourselves to hold ourselves accountable for the decisions we are making today, the
Yep.
systems and corporations that we are participating in, and how that impacts our children, our grandchildren, and as a lot of indigenous communities talk about 6 or 7 generations into the future.
Mhm.
Right? If we
Mhm.
keep going the way that we're going, there's not going to be 6 or 7 generations in the future.
Yeah. 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 Fun fact: I actually went to Saint Ignatius's birthplace this past summer.
Oh, yeah?
I was walking down the street with some friends, and they, by the way, that's where he grew up. I was get out. It was a weird, strange fun fact. But yeah, I think yeah, at some point, some guy starts daughter number 2 and 3. My daughters 2 and 3 had gone post George Floyd on had gone on a protest march and put it up on social media, and I loved it and supported their efforts. And some guy made some slightly withering comment, and I just chilled him to the. First of all, you don't talk about people's kids, and then secondly, you know, would you rather have them do this or be immersed in some, whatever the Candy Crush, whatever the
Right.
video game, because they're involved in an intellectual capacity, and I think that's to be praised,
Right. And I think the
Yeah.
last point on this, if this seems too esoteric, I would just ask, if my guess is that anyone who's still listening believes is sort of in the ballpark with us politically.
Mhm. Mhm.
One of the things that I'm thinking about right now is how much money do I spend on Amazon?
Mhm.
Right? Are there other places that I could buy things? Right?
Yep.
I'm not on Twitter anymore. Right? I
Mhm.
mean, making a moral decision doesn't have to be some huge thing, right?
Right.
And there are people who have a reason to shop on Amazon, but there are other options, there are other things. Just being intentional about an ethic of consumption can also be a moral choice. All right,
Bad,
do you have
Bad Brains have a song which I have loved for years, which is sort of ripped off by Rage Against the Machine, or maybe they just updated it. But the song is called "We Will Not," and the chorus is "We will not do what they want or do what they say." I just always, as I've enjoyed that, and at my job before last, I came to that moment with they said, "We want you. We're going to give you an ultimatum. You must do this thing." I go, "This is the thing that you told me I could do, and you're telling me I can't do it." Yes, and if you don't, we're going to get rid of you. I go, do what you got to do. Finally, the Bad Brains portion kicked in. I was like, and I'm not going to do what you want or what you say. So now your move. So yes, but I do have a fire me.
yes.
And this is connected to the company that I just spoke about. And briefly, it's in our wheelhouse now because sentencing for one of the co-defendants comes up next week, March 14th. This would be Susie Hahn, chief of staff. And in the court papers I finally got a couple of days ago, what I read was that she was the Ben Smith's New York Times article outing the fraudulent behavior at Aussie Media, which is a company I worked at for almost 10 years. Um, his article came out Sunday night, Monday. She was served with a subpoena on Tuesday. Before that week ended, and we're talking the work week, so before Friday, so we're talking Wednesday or Thursday, her counsel immediately contacted the Justice Department and said, I will cooperate in each and every way possible. And I don't know how long it took her to come to that decision, but I can look at when she was subpoenaed and when her counsel called in. I don't know what happened in that scant 48 hours, but largely what happened is exactly what should have happened with somebody who had a boss who had trammeled over the acceptable lines of fiduciary responsibility. And I guess she thought, it's the game is up. The game is up. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. It wasn't to get a reduced sentence, which she'll probably get, or a lower fine, forfeiture, or restitution, which she'll probably get. I think it was just the sheer kind of philosophical, religious joy of confessing, and it was a model of I knew her. She was only there 2 years
Mhm.
that we crossed over, but I thought this is model behavior, especially when juxtaposed to the extreme bad behavior that had preceded it. And I was like, that's 100%. This should be in biz school as to what you do when you've been caught in a difficult and unpleasant position. Uh, at this point now, I'm disclosing everything, and they said the case wouldn't have gone as deep, as far, and had been as completely successful without her involvement. So, and this is the Justice Department writing, clearly making a case for her to have no punishment at all, because that's what they want you to do. Yeah, yeah, play along to a certain degree, but if you get caught, that's it. Disclose. So
Well,
I,
and
I
there's a moral component to that as well, right?
mhm,
People make mistakes. If you find yourself in a situation where you have cut a corner or allowed someone else's bad behavior to ride, you then have an opportunity to make amends for that behavior. You
yeah,
can participate in the prosecution. You can talk about what's happening. You can change your ways. All of these are the moral dimension
yeah,
to participating, which I think that ties right in with what we were talking about.
perfect. It's a segue
Okay,
because we
segue.
are professionals.
All right. If you have an idea, a comment, a thought, a disagreement, what have you, get in touch. WTF at badbossbrief.com. WTF at badbossbrief.com. I will read it and respond to you, or you can comment on any of the social media places where we are posting this. And we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's number 3, on Instagram. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF at badbossbrief.com. We personally answer every submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.